You have probably seen them before. A small shape drifting slowly across your field of vision. A thread, a speck, a transparent ring that seems to float just out of reach. You try to look directly at it. It moves. You look the other way. It follows. You blink. It's still there. And then, just as quietly as it appeared, it drifts out of view, leaving you wondering whether you imagined it. You didn't. And here is what will surprise you. That shape was not in front of your eyes. It was inside them. And there is something even more striking than that. In most cases, what you were seeing was not an illusion, not a symptom, and not a sign that something is wrong. It was a shadow, cast by something floating inside the eye itself and projected onto the surface of your retina by the light entering from the world outside. So what is actually casting that shadow? And why does it follow every movement of your eye, no matter how fast you try to escape it? To understand floaters, you have to go somewhere most people have never thought about: the interior of the eye. Behind the lens, filling the entire back chamber of the eyeball, is a clear, gel-like substance called the vitreous humor. It is composed primarily of water, along with collagen fibers and hyaluronic acid, a molecule that helps maintain the gel structure. The vitreous stays mostly water throughout your life. What changes with age isn't the water disappearing, but the microscopic arrangement of the collagen and hyaluronic acid within it. In early life, the vitreous is dense, uniform, and almost perfectly transparent. Light passes through it without interference. The world appears clear. But the vitreous does not stay that way. Over time, the gel gradually loses its uniform structure. Collagen fibers begin to clump. Pockets of liquid form within what was once solid. The internal architecture of the vitreous slowly becomes less organized. And when clumps of collagen or debris form within that gel, they become partially opaque. Light entering the eye reaches them before it reaches the retina. The clumps cast shadows. Those shadows fall onto the retina, the light-sensitive layer at the back of the eye responsible for vision. You never actually see the collagen itself. You only ever see the shadow it casts. The brain, receiving that shadow as part of the visual signal, interprets it as something present in the field of view. That is a floater. Not an object in the world, not a defect in vision. A shadow cast by debris suspended inside the eye and interpreted by the brain simply as part of the incoming visual image. Here is where the story becomes more interesting. The reason floaters seem to move when you try to look at them directly is not because they are evasive. It is because of how they are suspended. Floaters drift freely within the vitreous. Because the vitreous continues moving briefly after the eye moves, floaters tend to drift away from the point you are trying to focus on before gradually settling, though the exact behavior varies depending on the floater's size, location, and the density of the surrounding fluid. You are, in a sense, always chasing something that moves with you but never quite lands where you are looking. Not metaphorically floating, but physically, suspended within the moving vitreous and carried by its motion. Now, why does this happen? The structural change in the vitreous is considered a normal part of aging, beginning, for most people, in their 30s or 40s, though earlier in those who are nearsighted or have experienced certain eye conditions. The process is called vitreous syneresis. As the relationship between collagen and hyaluronic acid changes with age, the gel structure breaks down and collagen fibers begin to aggregate. New floaters are most noticeable when freshly formed. Over weeks and months, they often drift out of the central field of vision, and the brain, through a process called neural adaptation, gradually learns to filter them from conscious perception, much as it filters out the edges of the nose or the presence of eyelashes. Most floaters do not disappear. They are simply deprioritized by a brain that has determined they carry no useful information.
This also explains why floaters are easiest to see when looking at a bright blue sky or a plain white wall. Uniform, high-contrast backgrounds amplify the shadows cast by floaters onto the retina, making them far easier for the visual system to detect. Indoors, reduced light, smaller pupils, and more complex visual scenes all reduce the contrast of those shadows, making floaters less conspicuous, even when they are still present. And here is something that changes how most people think about this. There is a specific event in the eye's natural aging process that produces a sudden, dramatic increase in floaters, and sometimes a brief flash of light. It is called a posterior vitreous detachment. As the vitreous gel continues to liquefy and contract over time, it eventually pulls away from the retina at the back of the eye.
The moment of separation can generate a sudden shower of new floaters, and in some cases, a distinctive ring-shaped floater known as a Weiss ring, formed when the vitreous detaches from around the optic nerve. Posterior vitreous detachment becomes increasingly common with age and affects most adults later in life. For most, it is entirely benign. But it is also the point at which floaters require attention. In a small number of cases, the vitreous does not detach cleanly. The pull of separation can create a tear in the retinal tissue, and a retinal tear, if untreated, can progress to a retinal detachment, a medical emergency capable of causing permanent vision loss. This is why a sudden onset of many new floaters, particularly when accompanied by flashes of light, a shadow at the edge of vision, or a curtain-like obstruction appearing in the visual field, warrants prompt evaluation by an eye care professional. Not because floaters are dangerous, but because a sudden change in floaters can, in rare cases, be the first visible sign of something that is. Why do some people experience far more floaters than others? Current evidence points to several established contributing factors. Aging is the primary driver. Nearsightedness is associated with higher rates, likely because myopic eyes are longer than average, placing greater stress on the vitreous. Previous eye inflammation, injury, or surgery can also accelerate the process. And individual variation in how quickly all of this unfolds remains an area of ongoing research. For most people, floaters are a permanent and essentially harmless feature of their visual experience. More common with age, more noticeable against bright or uniform backgrounds, and less intrusive as the brain adapts. For a minority, floaters are numerous or centrally located enough to meaningfully affect daily vision. Clinical options exist, including laser vitreolysis, which uses targeted laser energy to break up floater material, and vitrectomy, a surgical procedure that removes and replaces the vitreous. Vitrectomy in particular carries meaningful risks, including retinal detachment and accelerated cataract formation. Current evidence supporting routine use for floaters remains limited, and both procedures are generally considered only when floaters cause significant functional impairment. Return for a moment to where this began. That shape drifting across your field of vision. The one that moved. The one that followed. It was not in front of your eyes. It was inside them. A shadow cast by debris within the vitreous, projected onto your retina by light from the world outside, and interpreted by the brain simply as part of the incoming visual image. What you see is not a direct record of the world. It is a construction, assembled continuously from imperfect information. Most of the time, that construction is extraordinarily accurate, but occasionally, a piece of collagen drifts through the light, and the brain, doing exactly what it was built to do, interprets a real retinal shadow as though it were an object in the outside world. And so, the next time a shape drifts quietly across your vision, you try to look at it, it moves. You look away, it follows. You blink, it's still there. And now you know exactly what it is. What felt like something passing in front of your eyes was actually a shadow cast from within. For a brief moment, your own eye allowed you to see something that is almost always invisible.
the structure inside itself. If you're curious about how your mind and our world really works, subscribe to WhyDecoded. Because everything has a reason. We just haven't decoded all of them yet.